And here we are. Welcome back to the Redshirt Sophomore. We never sit out. We're your hosts, MD and CD today. We're talking more coaching carousel, right? What else are we going to talk about right now? We got lots of stuff that we can talk about, but we want to specifically talk about three more coaches today. All right. We're pumping through these coaching carousels. We're going into insane detail. If you haven't watched our other videos regarding this, you should definitely give them a watch. All right. Like, we are hands down doing the best coverage of any other national media outlets of these head coaching hires. So make sure you guys are on those videos big time. We got Tulsa, we got UNC, and we've got UCF today. Two of the three Power Four conference head coach hirings that were made in this offseason. And then an interesting one with Tulsa, right? Which honestly, I think CD and I both agree here that the Tulsa hiring is actually probably the best one, on paper,
Well,
right?
yeah, the other ones are definitely more notable. Obviously, it is the Power Four, and especially like you said, in a cycle where there's only a couple of them, those are going to be magnified, especially when Bill Belichick is involved, as well as Scott Frost going back to UCF where he had so much success. But yeah, we can't wait to get in them. We've been having a blast, like you said. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying that content as well. Obviously, it is February right now, or March, whenever you're watching this, but um, it's still college football season. A lot of stuff's going on. Mountain West just released their schedule, and listen, I will give you an early teaser here. San Diego State has
San
a
Jose State.
really thank you, San Jose State, excuse me. The Spartans down there, they have a really nice setup there, and sometimes we're going to talk about it all off season and next season. You look at some of these path to the playoffs, like scheduling matters, and that was no more evident than this year with Indiana, SMU, and some other schools, right? So it's obviously exciting to think about. Obviously some news there, but yeah, I'm excited to get in these coaches here.
Me too. The names of these coaches. Okay, you got Trey Lamb, you got Bill Belichick, and you got Scott Frost. Scott Frost, I'm sure you college football fans are familiar with, and obviously you guys are familiar with Bill Belichick. If you're watching this video, okay, you know who he is, right? But let's talk about Tulsa. Let's talk about Trey Lamb. He's a little bit of a different type of hire than I think some of these other coaching hires that we've talked about. I would say he's a lot, more similar to the Mike Yurimovich hire, the Matt Drinkle hire. They're all different in their own ways, all right? In Tulsa, to be honest, now the American Conference, I should say, is set up in a way where they can win. Okay, like anyone can compete in that conference theoretically, but they are not spending as much money as some of their competitors. Their geography limits them, unlike their competitors, Oklahoma, right? Oklahoma State, where they're bigger name brands, where they can use that when they go recruit in the state of Texas. I mean, Tulsa had a very solid receiver in Shaquille Spartan committed, up until November, and then Shaquille Spartan decommits, and he's going over to Houston now, and he's going to go play close to home, and it's it's tough losses like that where geography can hurt you, in the long run. And Shaquille Martin's a good player, good wide receiver over there that the Golden Hurricanes could have had, But Trey Lamb, his story evolves around, honestly, he's pretty young. He's 35 years old. Okay, everywhere he's coached, he's absolutely put up humongous numbers, right? When he's been the offensive coordinator at Tennessee Tech, when he's head coach at Gardner Webb, East Tennessee State. I mean, he got the head coaching job at Gardner Webb when he was what, 30 years old, 31 years old? Like, that's young, That's young. We talk about like some young offensive minded coaches and how that they can have a big impact on, smaller teams that are looking to propel their program in the right direction. We've talked about Scotty Walden before, and like how excited we were about him because he has a really interesting offense and he's going into a place that, desperately needs revival, on that side of the football. I think you could also put Tulsa in that category as well, although defense has probably been a bigger problem of theirs the last couple of seasons. But CD, I mean, how are you liking this hire, Trey Lance? It's a new face in Division One football.
But yeah, like you said, obviously there's a similar blueprint. You're seeing some of these schools start to lean in, right? We talk about a trend when we're doing these. Of the 13 coaches we've talked about right now, including Trey Lamb, 9 of them have been offensive minded head coaches. And like you said, it seems to be a popular trend right now. Obviously, what you can do elevating talent or finding schemes, making your program and your football play style sexy, attracting recruits. It's all the big talent right now. And yeah, obviously we'll see. You mentioned him, a new face to the FBS. Yeah, I love that he has all his head coaching experience at just 35 years old. He's 5 years of head coaching experience is super, super impressive, right? And it's very rare. However, it has been at the FCS level. So it is definitely going to be a step up, and especially in a spot where you are Tulsa now in the American Conference, although wide open as it is, right? It's still a spot where you are by far, right? In no means like one of the top spenders in certain things. Now you are seeing, a little bit more, I think, emphasis and investment put into the program. Obviously, so real quick, his contract, it's going to be a 5-year deal, 1.4 million. It's a little bit closer to Philip Montgomery, his salary, versus Kevin Wilson, which is closer to 2 million. So you have that money. Obviously, you had to buy out Wilson, right? So you got to pay for that too. But you have that difference in salary to invest back into the program, which is hopefully they're able to do. And not that this is a budget hire at all, but I think it's part of getting a guy with less experience and less name, right? That you can go out and you don't have to spend and break the bank for him. And you can put that money back into spots where he can be successful. It's been reported that, they're going to have about $3 million for this Tulsa team for NIL money, and that's on top of the revenue sharing that's coming, right? Who knows what's going to happen with that, right? But that's on top of that, as well as $2.75 million for his assistant coaching salary pool. So obviously, it's a big deal for Tulsa and in the American. That puts you in competitive spots for sure. But yeah, obviously it remains to be seen. We'll see what happens. Um, It'll be interesting. I want to go back to Tulsa and what they've done, prior to 2024, right? So Kevin Wilson was the guy for a couple years. It didn't work out. But flat, it did not work out. 4-8, and then 3-0 before getting the can there at the end of the season. It was tough. He took over a program that Phil Montgomery, I thought, did a good job with, but obviously left some to be desired, and obviously did not hit the ground running at all. And I think Tulsa, obviously, it's a quick trigger. We're seeing a couple times now. You've got these coaches moving on pretty darn quickly from their, or these programs moving pretty quickly on from their coaches. But sometimes it's the way it goes. And this is such a critical offseason as well, with the revenue sharing, with conference realignment, with the playoff changing structures, all that things. You want to be putting your best foot forward in college football in 2025. Make no mistake about that. Looking back when Tulsa did have success, right, even in the American, right? So they were in the CUSA, right? And then they joined the American. And Montgomery had a really nice season. You go back to 2016, and that was, by the way, maybe even a more competitive conference, top to bottom, than it is
100%.
today, right? So you had Temple, right, and Matt Rule, that was 10-4. South Florida was 11-2 that season. You had, Tulsa was 10-3. Navy was 9-5. Houston with Tom Herman was 9-4. That beat that Heisman Trophy winning Lamar Jackson. If you remember that season, remember the end of the year, they had that non-conference game with Louisville and Houston and all that. I think that was like a Thursday or Friday night. It was a weeknight. But anyways, that was there. Memphis was still in that. You had UCF was there. You had Cincinnati. It was a Scott Frost, who we'll be talking about later, was in the American that in 2016. So, like I said, it's there to be done. There's proof of it working at Tulsa. Now, obviously, college football has changed a lot the last 9 years for sure. Maybe it puts Tulsa in a better spot. Maybe it doesn't. And we'll see how Trey Lamb handles it all. But all in all, I mean, it's exciting. It's a change. I think you're seeing some rally behind this Tulsa program and hopefully start to build some momentum. But obviously, it doesn't mean anything if you can't win the games on the field.
Yeah, and the man who made the decision, right, Justin Moore, brand new AD, right, coming from the athletic department at Texas A&M. Justin Moore is a very bright guy. Okay, like if you really are tied in with Texas A&M athletics, you would know that Justin Moore had a lot to do with Jim Schlossnagle getting hired at Texas A&M, which didn't work out long term for Texas A&M, and now Texas A&M fans absolutely despise Jim Schlossnagle to his core. You know, but he took him to Omaha twice and was a runner-up national champion, right, at Texas A&M, which they never won a national championship in baseball. That was the best team, not even the best team in Texas A&M history, but like the most accomplished team in Texas A&M history. So Justin Moore had a lot to do with that signing right there. And again, like I said, it didn't work out long term, but Justin Moore, he's younger, right? He's got a lot of energy, right? He's got the experience. He's worked in a huge athletic department, right? Managing budgets, managing teams. Like he's helped he's been associated with some good hires at Texas A&M, and he's coming over here. This is his first big hire. He's like, I'm gonna get Kevin Wilson out of here, right? And we're gonna bring in a new guy, and it's gonna be Trey Lamb. And I don't blame him, right, for thinking, hey, like, what do we talk about with some of these? We'll call them lesser, teams in certain conferences, but sometimes it's good to just have a really innovative offense, right? And then let the defense come in either spurts or maybe you hire a good staff, pause. But
Sorry.
I you just made that face, so it was pretty funny. But I think Justin Moore is a guy that you can trust at Tulsa generally. So I I'm gonna ride with him on this, right? Pause.
Yeah, and who is Trey Lamb? You talked about the innovative offense. Let's hear from him. So he talks about how he came from an air raid background. He played for an air raid head coach. His dad was an air raid guy when he was a head coach in high school, I believe. Um, he was 21-year coach in Calhoun High, right? Very, very good. 3 state titles, a lot of success there. His grandfather also has won 3 titles as a head coach in high school. So obviously that pedigree there in that family is very interesting. But he does talk about too where that's where the terminology, that's where the roots come from. But the style and the culture, they want to run the football, and I think that's so important in the American Conference. You have a lot of programs that do both, right? But you see sometimes more. I think about Tulane. I think about Navy, Army, teams that had success this past season ran the football really, really well. And all that. He talks about, getting the ball to his best football players, playing with tempo. He's going to be calling plays. So when we go through the coaching staff, later on in this video, just keep that in mind when we're talking about the offense coordinator there and what his responsibilities will be. He talks about his quarterback being like a point guard, right? Where, just distribute the football, don't make mistakes. They want speed, 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 speed. He talks about using his geography to his advantage, maybe not having these beefy offensive linemen around him, but you do have a lot of talent there, yeah, in wide receiver, running backs, tight ends, all that kind of stuff. And also playing that offense, you are able to attract, talent to you. You're bringing in the portal here. You got Micah Tees, who you're familiar with, who our AD is familiar with. Down from Texas A&M, he's a wide receiver there, very athletic dude. You got the running back and former bowl game star Ricky Hunt Jr. coming up from Athens, Ohio.
Nice. Good
And you
get.
got Missouri's wide receiver Mekhi Miller as well. You talk about speed and athleticism, boom, 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 right there. And then who's going to be the quarterback? And well, obviously a lot has to be played out there, but Kirk Francis is coming back, and obviously it was very up and down, a little bit more down than up this year for sure. But getting him a new system, see how that goes. So it's all intriguing, obviously, and I like to think about these things, like talk about them. But that's kind of what he's talking about bringing in, just to give you a sense of what's going on in this Tulsa program.
Yeah, he doesn't. He's not bringing over a lot of wins though, right? I think that's what concerns some people. You're like, he's only 27, 25. If you take away the FBS games, right, that he plays, he's probably what, like 24 and like 16 or something like that. So like respectable, but it's like, oh my gosh, is that enough to be promoted to a Division I job? It's like, but also you got to think about putting people in bleachers. Like what's going to get people excited? An offensively innovative, mind like that. And you mentioned air raid stuff. Like I remembered, I don't know what year it was, but Mississippi State was looking for an offensive coordinator. I'm pretty sure a few years back under Mike Leach, and I'm pretty sure the name Trey Lamb was brought up as a potential candidate to be an offensive coordinator for Mississippi State. I'm not sure, how much steam there was behind that. Whether it was Mike Leach or maybe it was Zach Arnett. When he was looking uh, for that one year that he was there. I'm not sure. I don't remember, but uh, don't quote me on that. But it's. I don't think this is a name like that's coming necessarily out of nowhere. I think like college football coaching circles have known about Trey Lamb and what he can do for a while now here. So I guess it's good to see him get promoted. It's good to see him, step up to this level. And like you said, interesting stuff in the transfer portal. But we'll see what else he can do, man. I mean, like it's got to turn into wins, right? It's got to turn into wins.
For sure. And let's get into Lamb here and who he is and where he's been. So obviously he's 35 years old. So he's only been coaching for about 12 years. He played quarterback at Tennessee Tech right after he graduated, after being captain, all that good stuff, he hopped into quarterback coaching role there. Was at Mercer for a couple of years. You'll see some crossover at Mercer with his staff he put together. And then he went back to Tennessee Tech as the offensive coordinator. Did some great things there as well. And then that got him the Gardner-Webb head coaching job, his first head coaching job there. And that was a program that was really struggling. And they were able to win their first conference title in 20 years. First playoff appearance since 1992. So maybe the wins, right, aren't there, but it's also like context matters. These programs, traditions, that all kind of matters. And we talk about expectations being different for every program, right? And we'll give our expectations later on when we
Correct.
do give our grades. Like it's not just about, oh, he's about 500, right? But if you're honestly though, if you're Tulsa, you're taking 500, you're taking going to a bowl game every season. So that's where we're at. But yeah, and then excuse me, went to East Tennessee State, and had some good stuff there. His real prowess was them, at Gardner Webb and what he did offensively. So they led the Big South in total points and touchdowns, total offense, completion percentage, completions back in 2022. 30 points, right? In the four of their only five conference games, and then include 3 over 40 points. So he was big time, obviously coach of the year that year in 2022. I believe, they were 5-0 in that conference season. So obviously that makes sense there going to the playoffs and all that. So yeah, Trey Lamb, obviously, you kind of dive in a little bit more and you can kind of start convincing yourself that, yeah, he knows what he's doing. Obviously we talked about it with Kitty, um, or Kitley at FAU. Is that Kitley, right? Similar sense here. We got a really young guy, right, coming in, offensive guru, 33 years old, and boom, thrown right in at FAU to be a head coaching job. You don't rise up like that, right, at that young age if you don't really impress people and really capture people's attentions. Obviously, it doesn't guarantee you anything, but like you said, I think there's a little bit more than meets the eye here with the young head coach in Trey Lamb.
And we talked about this with Zach Kitley, and like the biggest question mark for us about Zach Kitley, and we love Zach Kitley. I gave him an insanely high grade. Is like what he's going to do for his defensive staff that he's going to hire, because you can trust him right on that offensive side of the ball. But like these young coaches, like it is so important that they hire really good staffs, right? The problem is that they don't necessarily have the same kind of connections that older coaches have, right? They haven't met the same people, like they haven't like they're not as tenured, right? So for me, like young coaches, like continuity and fit matter a lot. Okay, I mean experience. It definitely helps a lot. In the coaching staff room, you want ears and mouths inside there that are going to be able to tell you and give you advice and like counsel through certain things through the growing pains. But he's also been a head coach for like 4 years now. So at the same time, Zach Kelly had never been a head coach, right? So that's why his staff might even be more important. However, even though he's coached as an offensive coordinator at the Division One FBS level, and Trey Lamb hasn't. Trey Lamb's also been a head coach, managing players, managing coaching staffs for 4 years now. So uh, I don't know. It's 5 years, it's 5 seasons. Yeah. So we'll see, man. I mean, I know you got a good summary for us on his staff here and what he's building. Do you like his staff that he's built, or like are we just gonna have to wait and see?
Well, again, we'll wait and see. Obviously, these are a lot of guys, and you talk about how you build a staff, your connections, and people you run through. When he's mostly in the FCS, these are not going to be people that a lot of college football fans have really heard of. And to be honest, truth be told, me neither. So I really had to dig deep, and I enjoyed learning about these guys. Let's get in here with the offense. So I mentioned, the play caller, the offensive play caller will be Trey Lamb, but there still is an offensive coordinator. The title is also going to be the QB coach, right? This will be Brad Robbins, and he was with, or he was the wide receiver coach, excuse me, at Tennessee Tech, where Trey Lamb, obviously graduated, played, and coached at. They did not have any crossover there, but that's the connection there as well. He also was an OC at North Greenville University, also coaching quarterbacks there as well. And then this past season was at UConn to be their quarterback coach and passing game coordinator. So to me, honestly, I with this hire, it's interesting because, you don't need this elite innovative play caller because you have that in Trey Lamb. You want, good, passing game coordinator experience, right? You want quarterback coach experience, things that he'll be doing, more in the weeks leading up to the game and not necessarily on game day, which sounds like the hit there. Wide receiver is going to be Ryan Switzer. Now, college football fans will remember that name because he was a star at North Carolina, was in the NFL, played for a couple teams there, the Cowboys, Steelers, and some others. I think the Raiders as well. He's been at Tulsa for a couple years now, so 2023. And then this past season, when Kevin Wilson got hired, he was thrown in charge as a really young kid to be the interim head coach. It shows how much that program and that infrastructure how much they really like him and how invested they are in him. And obviously what he's done as such a young coaching career, super impressive. But again, young youth inexperience as well. Notice the trend here. The running back coach is going to be Cam Martin. Some of you diehard fans of college football remember him at Auburn. He was at UCF reuniting with his head football coach, Gus Malzahn. He also coached at Texas State, right? Gus Malzahn and UCF. You remember RJ Harvey. You got some really good running backs coming through there. With Cam Martin, the tight end coach, who's also going to be co-offensive coordinator. Again, it's more just formalities and pay structure and different things. It's going to be Ty Darlington. He was an all Big 12 offensive lineman at Oklahoma. He also coached at his alma mater in Florida as well. Has got, obviously that pedigree on the offensive line, but also has a lot of experience coaching tight ends with Oklahoma and Florida. The O-line coach is going to be New Mexico, I didn't even write down his name. I'm going to get that in 1 second here. He was New Mexico's tight end coach this past season. He was also the O-line coach with Gardner Webb with Lamb. So we talk about this in a lot of our videos, right? I love the communication and the connection and the chemistry between your offensive play caller and your offensive line coach. I think those are such key spots. There's so much you have to control as an offensive line coach. It's 5 positions at once, and how hard it is to have a good, successful offensive line with the athletes that are on the field, with defenses, and obviously with the fast pace of college football and all that kind of stuff. That's so important. So you get that chemistry. I love. He also, played at South Alabama. He played at NC State for a little bit after transfer there for his graduate season. Was also in the NFL with Houston. So obviously, all in all, it's a very interesting hire. It's listen, it's youth, it's inexperience, and all it's kind of good stuff. But the reality is, it's kind of what you're getting with Trey Lamb. You're just gonna try something new here, and that's Joe Scheffel, by the way. That's the offensive line coach. Excuse me.
Yeah, and the youth doesn't necessarily make me as concerned, right? It's nice seeing a lot of continuity there, but sometimes when you're a young coach, those are your only options, right? Like, especially like going to Tulsa. How many like top tier, like offensive coaching staff members are you going to be able to actually get to come with you? If you're not already tenured at the FBS level, like you're going to have to like just have a lot of guys. Yeah, you're going to have to take chances on guys, and you're also going to have to bring guys over that you've had, keep guys, retain people, good coaches like Ryan Switzer, right, on staff, like you mentioned. So it'll be really interesting. And, I'm sure Ryan Switzer was a big part in, acquiring Micah Tease, Kai Miller. So we'll see. Obviously, Jaquise Martin decommits, goes to Houston. We'll see how he does there with Willie Fritz and the boys. But I mean, we talk about these staffs, and there's staffs that we can get excited about, and there's staffs that we aren't necessarily as excited about. This is one of those ones where you just gotta wait and see, right? It's not going to be a big bump. It's not going to be a big negative to the grade that I give on this coaching hire. But the reason why we want to do these coaching hires or these videos after, a while after they've happened is to see how these staffs have assembled, to see how these guys are going to operate their program. And then I think it's fair to give an attempt and try to grade what we think the hires are, basically. So,
without a doubt. And Kevin Wilson, by the way, he was 63 years old, and that didn't work out. So you got a little opposite there. And I think that's part of, what sold
almost half his age.
Yeah, that sold Justin Moore, the AD there. And obviously, you go big, go home, right? So defense side of the ball, obviously you talked about it. We talked about with Zach Kitley, where how important this is going to be. If you have a very offensive-minded head coach, guy that's going to be consumed with calling plays, it's a huge responsibility in the FBS, right? The defense side of the football, that defense staff has to be super self-sufficient and on the same page there. What I like is you'll see a trend here, a lot of connections to each other and a lot of connection to Coach Lamb. So there's that built-in chemistry already and that trust that has been formed. starting with the defense coordinator who will be calling plays, Josh Reardon. He'll also be coaching the safeties as well. He was at Gardner-Webb with Lamb as the defense coordinator and safeties coach as well. Before that, he was the DB coach at Eastern Kentucky. The D-line coach is Hakeem Gray. He was with Lamb and with Reardon at Gardner-Webb as the D-line coach. He played college football at Louisiana Tech. The linebackers coach is going to be Mike Gray. Mike Gray is also going to be the co-defense coordinator, but again, it's more about formalities. He was the linebacker coach at Gardner-Webb, as well as a co-special teams coordinator. And he also played for and coached under Trey Lamb at Mercer. Now, obviously, he was the linebacker, while, Lamb was more on the offense side of the ball, coaching quarterbacks for Mercer. But again, there's that connection and continuity there. And then, in the secondary, you're going to have the cornerbacks coach. It's going to be Dominique Franks. He's a hometown kid. He was from Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is awesome. He played at Oklahoma late 2000s, on that national championship, runner-up team, second team all Big 12. He was in the NFL as a fifth-round pick. And he's been at Tulsa, similar to Ryan Switzer, since 2023. And he coached the cornerbacks last season. So that's that stayover. So you've got Switzer as a stayover on the offensive side of the ball. And here is Dominique Franks as a stayover on the defensive side of the ball from this past staff. Special teams coordinator will be Carter Barfield. He spent 7 seasons at Mercer and worked with Lamb at Mercer, and obviously Coach Mike Gray. He coached him as well. Before that, he was at UT Martin. Most recently, he was at Florida State as an assistant special teams coach, and I don't think we're too excited to see him leave the building, as he helped coach a couple of All-American specialists there at punter and kicker. So, obviously, we go through this coaching staff here. You mentioned it. Obviously, a lot of names, a lot of new faces to FBS, but there's that chemistry and continuity where, in my opinion, right, there are certain ways to build staffs. Obviously, there are a lot of different ways that work, but to me, this is a formula and a plan that is built for success. Now, will it happen? Obviously, remains to be seen, but, all in all, I don't think it's a terribly negative coaching staff at all. Like you said, it's not going to influence the grade too much because it is a wait and see, but it's something that you can get optimistic about if you are a Tulsa fan.
Also, the environment that you're in, right? Like these Gardner-Webb coaches that he's bringing in, they didn't overly impress, all right, on the defensive side of the football, like when they were there. All right, let's just get that out of the way, okay? But we talked about it with Rice and Scott Abel. We talked about it with Temple and Casey Keeler. We talked about it with FAU, right, and our boy Zach Kelly. Like, the American Conference is one of those conferences that you can actually probably get away, and this will change year to year, right? So we could totally be wrong about this for the upcoming 2025 season, but it's one of those conferences where you can generally get away with not having an elite defense, right? Army and Tulane generally have this past season and a half, they've had really good defenses, right? And that's kept them in a lot of ball games and let their offenses that are good, but they're able to take advantage of their offenses in short fields even more. So, but teams like Memphis have had a lot of success, just chucking and heaving the ball, running the ball, playing really good offense, right? North Texas, has given teams trouble, because of that Eric Morris offense. Navy gave a lot of teams trouble, because of that really interesting Brian Newberry offense that they've added there. So you can get away and be successful in the American. I don't know that you can win a conference championship without playing defense, right? But I'm not sure. I don't think you can't. You can succeed with a really good offense and just a mediocre defense, right?
Without a doubt, too. And also, numbers also sometimes don't always tell the truth with. Now, it wasn't great. I'm not going to just sugarcoat it, right? But the reality is, styles and complementary football, that matters. If you're Army and Navy, your defense is playing much, much less than your Memphis's and your other, high-tempo offenses in the American, which is what Tulsa will be. He talked about, being a high-tempo guy. And if you're leading the conferences that you were in completions and completion percent, you're throwing the football a ton and scoring the ball a lot, you are putting your defense in vulnerable positions. Obviously, it has to be better on the field, and it's only going to get harder, right? Where you're not going to be able to put up these 40-point games all the time, at Tulsa. But yeah, you said it. It's not the end all be all. And the reality too is we'll get in expectations, but conference championship, yes, it would be awesome for sure. But Trey Lamb can exceed his expectations and not win a conference championship, in my opinion. Lastly, on the staff here, so you got front office hires, which is so important in college football today, which was nice that Tulsa was able to accommodate that. And I recognize that, like, yeah, we need to spend and surround Trey Lamb, who, by the way, is a new football coach to FBS, but also generally, like, he doesn't have 30 plus years of experience like Bill Belichick coming along, that he could use the help around him for sure. So he's bringing in former Tulane head coach and NFL guy, Chris Cefello. You also have Mason Beal from Fresno State to be the GM, Ravi Savitala as chief of staff, Grant Claver from Arkansas State to be the director of football ops as well. So yes, it's not a bad. I mean, again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know all about these guys and if they're skeet or not, but it's just I like the idea of Tulsa making it an interest and a top of their priorities to put people around Trey Lamb to give him success to succeed or spots to succeed at Tulsa.
I agree, right? So what's the expectation at Tulsa, right? Is it, that stretch that you had there with Todd Graham, early Bill Blankenship, Steve Cragthorpe, like where you're winning 7, 8, 9 games, double digit games? Is that the expectation? Because I mean they haven't won double digit games since 2016. All right. They've had 2 winning seasons since then. So what's the current expectation? All right. With the new American format and the way that it is, where you don't have Cincinnati, right? You don't have Houston, you don't have SMU, okay? I think Tulsa should be able to go 2 bowl games. I think they should be able to. You take out those teams and you add the service academies, I think you should be able to go bowling, If not every year, every other year. I think that that's a realistic expectation that you can have. Do I think that Trey Lamb is going to meet expectations? I think yes, right? So that's going to lead me to give him a B, right? But I can't justify giving him more than that because even with his, nuanced offenses, like he really hasn't built a complete defensive coaching staff that's performed at a high level. He really hasn't won a ton of games. He's, drastically changed, the program of Gardner Webb for sure. But I just think that this is a hard place to coach and win at. But I do think, in terms of you're, I guess, middle of the pack in terms of actual resources as an athletic department in the American, like you can compete. You can compete. You should be able to beat the Charlottes, the Rices, the UABs, right? You should be able to beat those guys. You should be able to. Now, my expectations for Tulsa as a program, even though Temple has kind of had it worse off these last couple of years, I think Temple, has a higher floor than Tulsa does as a program, So that's kind of where I'm at with this program, this expectations. So I'm going to give it a B, kind of reluctantly though. I'm not crazy about him. There's other coaches that I've given B minuses that I would also have to give him a B minus, if I didn't think he was going to meet the expectations. But I have to give him a B minus at the same level that I'm giving some of these other coaching hires, and I'm like, I don't know that I can do that. So
it's tough because we've done a bunch of these American hires, right? We did FAU, we did Temple, we did Rice, we did Charlotte, East Carolina. I remember that with Mike Houston going and getting out of there. So it's interesting because I'm gonna give it a B as well. But again, I gave B's to some other programs, in the American, or I gave higher grades to some other programs in the American that I just feel better about. So unfortunately, like I think Tulsa got better from this. I do believe that, right? Will it lead to wins? And that's sometimes where you have scheduling and different year to year context just matters. So I think the program is going to be better and be playing more competitive football in the American at Tulsa. Yes, without a doubt. Can I sit here and guarantee you that he's going to make a bowl game in most of his years? No, but I just think more times than not, I just like the hire, and I'm just going to give it a B here. But it is like it's one of those things where like I like a lot of the hires American, and the reality says like not all of them are going to hit. So it's going to be you just got to hope if you're a Tulsa fan, if you're FAU, if you're Charlotte, if you're East, whoever, right? You just want to be your team to be the one that hits, obviously. And if you're Trey Lamb and you're hitting it big at Tulsa, that's awesome. And also, too, I hate to say this, but if he's gone in a couple years, and it's not because he was fired, it's because he was promoted or someone else plucked him because he's done such a good job there, that's a great thing. And like it sucks, obviously, but it's leaving the program in a better spot than you found it. And we talked about where you stack hires in the G5, and that's where you put yourself in spots like Boise State, like UCF had for a little bit. Cincinnati did that a very good job, and programs like that, you put yourself in a spot to succeed year over year in all these conferences.
Let's go to our first Power Four hire that we're going to talk about this offseason. And of course, it's going to be Bill Belichick. Because why not? In year 2025, Bill Belichick is your head coach of the North Carolina Tar Heels. Wow. When I saw that, there was strong, you know, motion for that, right? On Twitter, on, message boards, handles, big names. Like, we're just like, yeah, this is a thing that can happen. And Bill Belichick himself was talking about it. Like, yeah, this could happen. I would be excited about it. And here he is making $10 million a year. All right. To go coach North Carolina, a program that, and I was pretty harsh on Mike Brown. All right. When he was on his way out the door, I was very harsh. I was one of the people that was like, you have this team that you built with this much talent and you were unperforming. The thing is that he built that team, right? Like, it was very talented, and it was more talent. Like, some of these teams that he had built here in North Carolina are more talented than anything that I've seen at North Carolina in my lifetime. But again, he underperformed relative to expectations that I had for him in those seasons. Bill Belichick is going to have very high expectations. All right, you have great geography. You're in a conference that's on a downward trend that you can definitely compete in. Okay, you already have lots of talent on this team. Um, you have the benefit of mega connections and hiring a nice coaching staff. You were the quote unquote greatest NFL coach potentially of all time, you know, according to some people, right? But I also look at this, I'm like, he's also 72. You hired Mac Brown. You fired Mac Brown basically because he wasn't performing up to expectations and he was old. He was slowing down. And then you hire this guy who's 72 years old to come in here. And it's like, what? It's obviously can't be a long term play. He's not going to coach till he's 80. There's no
That's
way.
the intriguing part is I'm not going to doubt that he still has the energy and the ability to succeed at 72.
Agreed.
He turns 73 in April. That's not what this is about. Saban was 72 when he retired, and we all agree he still had it in him to be a damn good coach in college football at the highest level. It's more about like what's next. Okay, great. It hits for a couple years. Like, is Steve Belichick gonna take over? Like, I don't know. That's the confusing part. And obviously, if you're an athletic director, right, you're just trying to keep your job and you're trying to get butts in seats and keep donors. And obviously, if it hits and Belichick does a great job there and exceeds expectations, like it's going to be a good hire. It's not the problem. It's just like the what next kind of aspect there. It's super bizarre. Yeah, like you said, they fired Brown, you know, before the season basically, and they let him coach his last season. Obviously, it was a loss there to North Carolina State, which is not a good thing. I mean, how many times did they lose to the Wolfpack there? It was 6-6 that's past season. Could have been worse, could have been better, but all around, like you said, underperforming. And they had a ton of talent. You walked in, you had Sam Howell and Drake May for how many years, and just underperformed. Like gifted, not gifted. That's the wrong word because he went out and recruited those guys and all that stuff. But going out and having that kind of talent at quarterback position for 5-6 years, but what it was a long,
But
long
how about
time.
those? How about the linebackers you had? How about some of those DBs that you recruited that went other places and succeeded? How about some of those defensive linemen that you recruited that just insanely underperformed? On the offensive line, you also had underperformed. The only position that you can argue that overperformed at North Carolina, there's three of them, right? It is quarterback, it is running back, and it is wide receiver, right? Everything else, a absolute total flop in terms of player development.
Yeah, but the problem is too, like you go with Bill Belichick, and yes, he is the greatest coach of all time, probably in the NFL. I'll get that, but you saw it really faltered at the end of New England, and obviously a lot had to do with Tom Brady leaving. And if you lose quarterback like in the NFL, it's really hard, right, to rebound. So I'm not going to blame him too much for that, but he struggled.
Roster
He's
management.
he struggled in roster management, roster construction, talent evaluation, which are more important at the college level than it is in the NFL. And obviously, he was like the GM type guy at the end there, and he struggled. Now he's bringing in Lombardi, he's bringing in other guys from the NFL to help him with that. But they are two massive, massive parts of the job.
Yeah, it's not
It,
that. Sorry, you said that you think talent evaluation is more important in college than the NFL. I don't necessarily believe that. What I do agree with you though is that it's harder in college
yeah,
talent evaluation. It's
yeah,
harder.
and you also like great. You hit on a guy like there's no guarantee right now he's going to be on your roster at the end of the season. So like,
There's no
and
contracts. No,
yeah, now I have no doubt he will be able to attract coaching staff and honestly land talented players. But
and he
by
has
the way,
already.
didn't Mac Brown do the same? Did it turn into wins? And again, we're kind of pooping on this, but I want to like get this into a realistic expectations here. There were names that emerged as serious contenders in this coaching search: Steve Wilkes, John Summerall, Glenn Schumann, Jeff Monken, Arthur Smith. Right, like not all of them were realistic options. Like I think Arthur Smith went back, and I don't know how Steve Wilkes really fit into to UNC there
I
in
mean,
this
it's
timeline here.
Charlotte. Yeah, it's Carolinas, I
I mean,
guess.
like, was he like in that? But John Summerall, are you kidding me? The fact that they did not walk away with John Summerall to me is honestly, and it's not fair to Bill Belichick, but I am dinging. They're great for that because I think
Or
they
Glenn
could have done,
Schumann,
or Glenn Schumann, or Munkin would have been
but
a home
more
run.
so, yeah, more so. Yeah, I think any of those three guys, are so good, and we're giving them a wonderful grade.
But
Wonderful
by the
grade.
way, too, Mac Brown, like he made it to the ACC championship game, didn't he? So like he was also in an era at the ACC that was probably the worst it's ever been. And I think
Yeah.
with Miami doing its thing, with Clemson doing its thing, you got some other programs playing well, in SMU obviously pulling up to the party. It's it's going to be more competitive. And North Carolina, all of a sudden, you can't just talent your way to a couple wins here and there, like you kind of did. So you have to bring it. No, I'm not saying Bill Belichick. I mean, he's known for the process. Him and Saban, right? But I just, and I hate to sound as a skeptic. I think it'll be different than Mac Brown. I just am not sure for sure because like yeah, it's super interesting. But by the way,
Yeah.
like I love it. And like they're opening with TCU and like he'll get a ton of publicity and UNC will get a ton of publicity and they will sell tickets for sure. And the AD and the boosters of the higher ups of the UNC will be extremely happy, I think, with this hire. It's just how many wins and honestly championship appearances or championships playoff spots will it amount to?
Yeah. And I don't know the answer to that. Right? I don't know the answer to that. So, I mean, Bubba Cunningham, you're the AD at North Carolina, right? Is I'll say 1 for 2 on coaching hires because I do think the Mac Brown one overall was successful because you proved that you could get talent in the building.
Oh, and
Right?
Fedora was terrible at the end of it, right?
Yeah,
Three
yeah,
and
Fedora.
nine, 2-9, like it was
Yeah,
bad.
that's why I'm saying
And
1 for 2. I think Larry Fedora was a miss.
it just
That's what
it
I'm
just
saying.
fizzed out really hard.
Yeah, yeah. I think Larry Fedora was a miss. I think Mac Brown was a good hire in the terms of like it proved that you could recruit talent.
Yeah.
Like that you could get talent in the building. All right. And now the thing is, it's like North Carolina. I get where they're coming at. They're like, okay, well, we can prove that we can get talent in the building. We need someone that can manage this talent. What about the greatest coach of all time at the NFL level? So I see where they're coming at. Like I just still have a lot of I just have a lot of questions. And it's going to be a very different adjustment. It's going to be a 365-day year job, which believe me, Belichick like is
He
obsessed with football,
he
right? Like
knows what he's getting
he's
into.
not gonna get bored. All right, probably. I mean, we'll see, but I just I'm with you, man. Like the fact that they could have walked away with John Summerall or Jeff Monken or like you said, Glenn Schumann, who's been in head coaching circles the last 2 cycles and just still hasn't gotten a look after everyone saw what Dan Lanning did It's like, okay,
and
what are we
Kirby
doing?
Smart before him, and like there's a trend
Yeah.
of
Glenn
defensive
Schumann.
coordinators from that tree.
Glenn Schumann was getting looks at Texas A&M, arguably a top 8 program in college football, and it's like,
Yeah,
what are we doing? What are we doing?
yeah, it's super intriguing, and obviously, yeah, I just the NFL or college football is more like the NFL now than ever. You could sell me on that argument for sure. And the transition we've seen coaches come down or come back from the NFL level and struggle. Chip Kelly, but potentially and some other guys. But like I'm in the camp that Bill Belichick for a while, just had the, you know, free pass. It's like, oh yeah, whatever he says, like benefit of the doubt, yeah, it's gonna work for Bill Belichick. But he kind of faded it as we saw when Brady split and they struggled a little bit. And also it's totally new territory here in college football. Let's talk about his contract here. So it's a $10 million annual contract, right? So it's a big one. It's so obviously,
That's
this is
huge.
a
That
program
is
that's investing
huge.
into him. And I'm sure they had to convince Bill Belichick, like they weren't gonna just. This is not for show and pone. This is not about Bill Belichick trying to leverage UNC into getting back to the NFL. This is a mutual big time investment in college football. So if you're a UNC fan, like that part to me, and I think I talked about this when it first happened, like that to me is exciting. To me, that's the story more than Bill Belichick is. Oh, UNC who has a lot of power and donations and potential prowess as you can flex their muscles and all of a sudden be a football school if they want to. You're starting to see them focus it. And honestly, like we're not college basketball podcast here, but the basketball program is not doing well, right? At all. And obviously it will always be, I'm not gonna say will always, it's obviously it's a big, Tar Heel Nation and all that, like obviously a huge deal, in college basketball, and they love their
And
basketball
baseball,
there.
they're
Yep. And yeah, like there's a ton of non-revenue sports too that they care a ton about, but you're seeing them really put investment in the football program with this contract. A lot was made about the buyout and all that and not signing for a while, but that's kind of all typical. The buyout was a little bit interesting, but I think part of that's like maybe a little bit show of good faith, between the two parties. Yeah, so it's a $30 million guaranteed, right? The first 3 are guaranteed, and then you got a couple more after that. $10 million annually for an assistant coach salary pool, 5.3 for support staff, and then 1 million for the strength and conditioning, right? So you add up all those, right? And just, in those, like you've got about 25 million in annual investments in football. And that's before the revenue sharing and the NIL, which could bring that number up to 40 million. And it's a big deal. First of all, it's a big number, especially in the ACC too, where you don't have this massive, TV network media rights deal that you can kind of just, pawn from. But you don't have a ton of programs that have the ability to do that in the ACC, and UNC puts himself in a spot to really compete there in that conference.
10 million. Nick Saban didn't start making 10 million. Again, greatest college football coach of all time. Didn't make $10 million base annually until 2022. His
There's a
second to
balloon.
last season.
It's a bubble right now in coaching salaries. Like, is it going to pop when you see these schools having to start making tough decisions and tough conversations with
Well,
this
revenue
revenue
sharing
sharing? Yep.
with players, like, yeah, what are they going to do? So,
And if you're a coach too, like, or if you're an AD, do you negotiate with your coach and like, hey, dude, like, take a couple million off, and so we can put that into revenue sharing because it's there's just there's a pot. It's not like unlimited. Like, yeah, certain programs have these, honestly endless pockets, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think at 99% of these programs. So it's tough. It's tough. Well, let's get in the staff here real quick. So there's going to be a lot of NFL influence. There's going to be a lot of familiar last names as well. So the offensive coordinator is going to be Freddie Kitchens. He was, I believe, the interim head coach, right, for the Fenway Bowl, which they did lose to UConn. But again, they didn't have a ton of guys playing that. Obviously, he's had success in the NFL, then worked in college. He worked at went to Alabama as well, and played under, I don't think was it Saban? I forget, to be honest. I think it was before that. But regardless, so there's a lot of crossover there. And obviously, Bill Belichick played him when he was at Cleveland and all that stuff. So he's familiar with him there in the NFL. The quarterback's coach is going to be Matt Lombardi. That's going to be the son of the GM, Michael Lombardi. He was with the offensive analyst at Oregon, helping them do their thing. He was also in the NFL with the Dolphins and the Panthers, as well as the Raiders. A lot of offensive familiarity there with all his work as a head coach, or as a coach, excuse me. The running back is going to be Natrone Means. He was a running back for UNC and also in the NFL. He's been on Mac Brown's staff the past couple seasons as an offensive analyst. Coached running backs at Winston-Salem prior, obviously to help develop Marion Hampton into a monster of a running back that they've had for a couple years now. The O-line is going to be Will Friend, was the OC at Western Kentucky this past season. He played with Freddie Kitchens at Alabama. And I'll say it again, like every video, we talk about these coaching staffs. The connection between OC and O-line coach is so, so important. Friend also coached O-line at Tennessee, Auburn, Mississippi State. So obviously has that, big name SEC pedigree, obviously familiar with, a tough ship and obviously competitive recruiting battles and all that kind of good stuff that you're going to need now that you're kind of putting yourself in these rooms with these big boys recruits. Offensive wide receiver coach is going to be Garrett McGee. He was at Louisville the past 2 seasons, Purdue before that, obviously with Jeff Brom, right, when he transitioned from Purdue to Louisville. He's coached all of the SEC, the Big Ten, G5. He's also the head football coach at UAB, which I love. So you've got Freddie Kitchen, who has head coaching experience. You've got Garrett McGee, who has college head coaching experience. So I love that to help Bill Belichick potentially in obviously navigating all of that. And by the way, McGee has developed some really good wide receivers at Louisville these past couple seasons and at Purdue as well. I think he was Charlie Jones, right? At Purdue, you had your guy last year, the Georgia Southern transfer was blanking my name.
Jamari
Thrash, thank you. And then obviously Ja'Cory Brooks and others here, for Louisville this past season. So obviously a pretty solid coach there. Defense side of the ball, a couple Belichicks, right? So you got Steve Belichick, obviously was the Washington Huskies, defensive coordinator this past season. Who say what you want about him, and I
He was
was
fine.
not. I thought he was fine. I think they're getting a better one there, and we'll talk about Washington, when we do this offseason, but they did improve significantly. And part of that, I think, was offensive play style for sure, and also their just schedule. Washington played a ton of good quarterbacks in the Pac-12. You played significantly less good quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Regardless, though, Belichick has been with New England for like 10 some years. He's worked all over the defense. He knows that Bill Belichick wants to run. So obviously, there's no surprise there that he was coming over. The D-line coach is going to be Bob Diaco. He was a DC at Cincinnati, Notre Dame, Nebraska, Louisiana Tech, Purdue. He helped Notre Dame go to that national title game down in Miami in 2012. The cornerbacks coach is Armand Hawkins. He's obviously familiar with Steve Belichick coming over from Washington, only 30 years old. So he's kind of one of the younger guys on staff, which is fun to see. And then Brian Belichick is also Bill's son. He coached the Patriots safeties for 5 years. He'll be doing that safeties work as well with the Tar Heels there. And then the special teams coordinator, special teams assistant is going to be Mike Prefer. He coached with Freddie Kitchens in Cleveland. So obviously Bill Belichick's familiar with him as he coached against him for many years in the NFL. His father, by the way, too, Prefer's father, Chuck, coached at North Carolina, right back in the late 70s, early 80s as a DB and D-line coach. So that's kind of fun, have that full circle. And I'm sure he's got memories as a Tar Heel, his dad did. So, and obviously the personnel staff, I talked about Marco Lombardi, the GM. You've got some player personnel guys, some player personnel staff. Strength and conditioning coach is going to be Moses Cabrera. He was the strength coach, right, for Belichick, for a long, long time. He was assistant strength coach for about 5 years in the early 2010s, and then he kind of finished off Belichick's tenure as the head strength and conditioning head coach. He has familiarity with the college game. He did serve as Fresno State's assistant strength coach, back in 2004 to 09. As well as with Colorado. So he's got some of the experience, but obviously familiarity with Belichick. Not a ton of surprises here with this staff. It seems, pretty Belichick-y. Obviously, you've got Lombardi, you've got Kitchens, you've got the Belichick, so no surprises there, obviously.
Yeah. This is what you knew you were getting, right, when you hired Bill Belichick. Like, this is exactly like if you were to say, all right, yeah, he's hiring a GM, I would have said, yeah, okay, he's hiring Michael Lombardi. Okay, I would have said, Offense coordinator, maybe wouldn't have guessed necessarily Freddie Kitchens, but
No
you
surprise
know,
though.
no surprise though. Belichick's having him on, yeah, absolutely. I didn't know that Michael Lombardi's kid was like a quarterbacks guy, but no surprise, right? Literally no surprise. All right, so expectations for North Carolina, like compete for an ACC championship, like legitimately compete for an ACC championship. And I know people are looking at it like this, be like, well, when's the last time like they've only been ranked in like the AP like top 10 like a handful of times in the last couple of years. It's like, yeah, that means like they can compete. All right, they have geographical advantage. They have money. They have, you know, I guess what you would call a coaching staff that they're paying $10 million for. Well, I should say they're paying $10 million to the head coach, which is one of the highest contracts in college football. It's almost as high as Kirby Smart. So let's understand what the expectations are for North Carolina when you pay your coach $10 million. Okay, the expectations you're getting a Kirby Smart, a Nick Saban, a fill in the blank here, a Ryan Day.
It's
Like
top 10. That's top 10 among salaries and head coaches.
you are paying a crap ton of money for that. Is he making more than Dabo? He might be making more than Dabo. So then, yeah, the expectation is to beat Dabo if you are making that much money. And watch out, Dabo's using the transfer portal now. So good friggin' luck, Bill Belichick. So I'm giving this a B minus, and and I thought about it too, and I'm like, yeah, obviously guys like John Summerall, I'd be more excited about, but if they're looking to win right now, like within these next couple of years, say Bill Belichick coaches there for 5 years, I think the expectation for Tar Heels fans would be to win a conference championship. If I was a Tar Heel fan, if I'm going to pay that much money, if the boosters are going to write those checks for Bill Belichick, that is the expectation, I'm assuming. And I don't know that he's going to do that, so I'm giving this a B minus.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think there's a lot of volatility here. I think more often than not, I see it being a little bit below expectations. I agree with you there on the expectations, without a doubt. You're paying a guy, you are second in your conference. So Dabo's making a little north of 11. Cristobal is little bit, it's like 7.8, right there. And then actually
She's making,
Norvell is making 10 million
but
after
only because Nick Saban retired. Remember, he got re-upped
and with the
during that whole
agents and
shenanigans
all
with
that.
Jimmy Sexton. Working his magic, getting guys bumps.
Just wild. And obviously that was from the previous year, so who knows what the actual numbers are in 2025. But yeah, the reality is like compete at a top 10 level, and if you're paying a guy that much, like it's different in the 4-team playoff. With the 12-team playoff, with the rules it's functioning, and honestly with this proposed 14-team playoff too, like there's no, to me it would be a disappointment if UNC did not at least have like serious contending for playoffs and ACC title games. Obviously, I do think there's a need for talent re-up. Like, I don't think it'll be in year one, right? But we'll see what happens there. And lastly, too, like you said with Summerall, I would have loved Summerall and Monk and other guys there, Schumann. But I also think too, like Bill Belichick's weight, like just like his name alone, right? I think it gets you a little bit more than what Summerall would have gotten you, and now I think Summerall's a better football coach. If you want to make these big time investments into your program, and I'm talking about the higher ups, right? Belichick, I think, is a guy that could sling some weight, similarly to how Saban did when he first got to Alabama, and really kind of kickstarted what he did with those boosters and some of the higher ups there and all that stuff, with Battle, the AD, and obviously moving into Burn as well. But yeah, I think it's gonna be super entertaining. I'm excited. I think it makes college football more exciting. It makes our job more fun covering UNC without a doubt. And I'm sure UNC fans, you let us know like what you're thinking. Is this something that you were expecting? And you're surprised? You worried about? Is it going to be really bad? If it's really good, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's obviously a big name. Bill Belichick is going to be in college football, and Saban is not, which is wild.
Scott Frost returns to UCF. It's year 2025. All right. When was Scott Frost last at UCF? If you remember Scott Frost and his tenure at Nebraska, all right, you would, be left with a little bit of a bad taste in your mouth. But if you remember the UCF days with Scott Frost, those 2 years that he was there just 2 years. which is crazy to think about. Uh, I guess his last year was 2017, where he went 13-0, beat Auburn in the Peach Bowl. The year before that, went 6-7, lost in the Cure Bowl. But the year before that, UCF went 0-12 under George O'Leary. So the turnaround under Scott Frost was marvelous, right? And then he goes to Nebraska because that's his alma mater, and yada yada yada. You know the story. Loses more one possession games than literally anyone in history ever, which is wild. So yeah, so you're bringing him back. You have an AD that was hired, I guess within the last 5 years, right? After, of course, this is after he never worked with or had ties with Scott Frost anywhere else. And they're bringing back Scott Frost. So I don't know if this is like a board of directors decision, board of trustees, whatever they do. Like, it's very interesting to me, CD. This is a very, very interesting hire. And I think like a lot of people would just slap a good grade on it, right? Because Scott Frost, it worked out last time at UCF. Here we are 10 years later, and college football is drastically different. And I don't know that it's necessarily just plug and play. Am I wrong?
No, it's not crazy to assume. It would be crazy to assume that without a doubt. I mean, we look at Scott Frost and what he did, and it's easy to get yourself excited. Like, oh, he's back at UCF. He's back in the American, or actually, I guess in the Big 12 now. But he's going to have success now. But I think we have to like figure out what went wrong at Nebraska first, and hopefully he's done some self reflection. That obviously, like the one possession games, some of that is like bounce of ball luck, and like, but also like that is concerning, without a doubt. And you are a power forward job now. This is a big deal. If you honestly ask me to rank some of the better programs in the Big 12, to me, UCF is in that top half of like best jobs I would want to have. So this was not some, rinky dink job that he's hiring. And also, too, this is a down year in terms of the programs that are available. So you had a lot of maybe not candidates available because it was kind of an interesting season, but you had your pick, right? It was you, North Carolina, Purdue, right? West Virginia. Those are the four that were, Power Five, Power Four, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about it. I'd like to get into it. I want to hear your thoughts as well, and obviously you guys while watching in the comments section, love to hear what you're talking about. Well, we know he can recruit well, right? He did that at Nebraska. He was bringing in some big time talent, some big time. Now, it didn't always turn out, right? But we'll see how it goes. And there is the ability to recruit at UCF without a doubt, even in the Big 12, even in Florida with all the big boys back and humming, what they're doing recruiting with Miami and Florida. But yeah, I think this is super interesting, and it's going to be entertaining. I was pretty close to Scott Frost being up here in the Big 10, so he got a lot of flack, he got a lot of hate, just because they would win the offseason. And this is the year Scott Frost turns around. If only they just win these one possession games, then look what they can do. And it was tough. It was. Did they even go to a bowl game? They did not.
Not this
Under
year.
Scott
No.
Frost.
Oh, Nebraska? No, they didn't. Which is literally, it's unacceptable there, right? So, but the flip side of that, right? When he came to UCF in what year is that? 2016. Yep. They went to 8 straight bowl games after that. 8 straight bowl games.
Well, it was a
You
good
know,
program.
yeah, and
George O'Leary was a really good coach for a while.
yeah, he was. And because what Georgia Leadery went from the MAC to the CUSA to the American, like he played in coached in 3 different conferences, and then it just didn't work out there at the end. And then Scott Frost comes in, gets hot, and I don't know that program well enough or remember that program well enough back then to remember like if he had legitimate talent on that team right away to start. But it is crazy to me, that kind of turnaround. But then I'm wondering too here, sitting and thinking about it, and it's like Terry Mohajir, all right, is the AD there. He was hired just 5 years ago, right? These last 2 hires, right? He hired Gus Malzahn, and I don't know that it was his decision, through and through, but he used to be an AD or administrative director or deputy athletic director at Arkansas State back when Gus Malzahn was there in 2012. When pretty sure they won the Sun Belt that year. So he had ties to Gus Malzahn. He knew him, right? There was a relationship there. That was a pretty safe hire, and it was a good hire. It was a good hire. Like when you looked at it on a piece of paper, you're like, that's a good hire, you know. And then they made the transition to the Big 12 just a couple years ago, which was a really good move by the athletic department right there. But is this just another quote unquote safe hire in their eyes? And I don't know that it's exactly safe, but like in their eyes, do they see this as a safe hire? Like, hey, we're gonna appease the fans. All right, we're gonna appease the board of trustees, and everyone's gonna sign off on this, right? And if it doesn't work out, it's like, oh, but it should have, right? Like, you know what I'm saying?
To me, this is not safe. That is not how I would
Me
describe it.
too. I don't
But I
think so
do
either.
think that there's a story, I think, there for sure. Like, we know this, right? You guys know this watching, that it's a business and you got to keep your job. If you're the AD, you have to be able to sell tickets. That's what your responsibility is. Just winning games is nice, but you need donors up, you need all these different things, right? Which do help you, right? The more tickets in your, that you're selling, the more money you're bringing and all that kind of good stuff. Eventually it does kind of turn on and goes funnel back into the program. But it's really interesting. I think, like, when I saw it, I wasn't surprised, but I kind of was. I was like, it makes sense, right? It worked first time, right? Scott Frost, what was he doing? Was it the Rams, I think, this past season, right? And, working with them, it's really interesting. Now, here's the problem. I mean, you went 4-8, and yes, you had injuries and you had up and down quarterback. You didn't hit on KJ Jefferson like we thought maybe you would,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. But you still have some of those problems too. And now you got Arizona State. Now you got a couple other programs that are Colorado and whoever. What Iowa State had a great season, and Kansas State, will be back, and all that stuff. And Utah, you have to believe will be better this year. And all of a sudden, you're looking at their conference outlook, and it's not like the American, where there's a couple teams that have more talent and more resources than others. Now, I will say, to its credit, back in 2016, 2015, it was a much better conference. Back then. And obviously, that UCF team wasn't just good for the American. It was really good. They went out down and beat Auburn. Obviously, everyone remembers that Peach Bowl. And the year after, um, going down to the Fiesta Bowl and all that, they were playing, that was Joe Burrow. They played Joe Burrow, right? And that was the
They
pick
lost, yeah. It
six.
was Josh
And
Heupel's first year.
yeah, so it's obviously, that was a very talented team, what he did there. And you think he can replicate it, but I think it's far, far from safe.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one too. And you said, if you talked about earlier, like your ability to recruit at the highest level in this new Big 12, like it's right there. It is right there. You can absolutely take the bull by the horns. Is Scott Frost going to be able to take advantage of that? And my answer to that question is like, I don't really know. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think you're going to be able to recruit well at UCF in general, just based on your geography and whatnot. But like taking it to the next level as a program, one that's perennially competing for college football playoff appearances and Big 12 championships, I think you got to take it to another level, right? And is Scott Frost going to be able to do that from a recruiting perspective? I don't know. Uh, I think from an offensive scheme perspective, I think he could absolutely light it up in this Big 12, given the large amount of parity that there is in terms of talent in this league, but you could have said the same thing about Gus Malzahn, right? And Gus Malzahn didn't have a winning season in either of his 2 seasons in the Big 12. So it's needless to say, it's just really interesting, and I don't know, like I was surprised by this, right? And I was thinking in my head, I'm like, man, there are a couple coaches that, maybe people skipped out on this hiring cycle, right? Yeah, you were UCF, okay? If you were to tell me, right, like in my mind, is this the best job that was available in the coaching market?
I think North Carolina is probably a better job.
Okay, even so, you are the second best program or resource, like it is the second best coaching job that was available this offseason, and you got Scott Frost, and it's like it's not very exciting, and I bet the athletic department feels pretty safe about it, but you and I are sitting here and we're like, this isn't safe. Like, this isn't necessarily a layup, slam dunk automatic fit of a hire for so many reasons. So, and the only thing that you're holding on to is those 2 seasons that he did, which, by the way, he overperformed very well. But then Josh Heupel was also phenomenal with this UCF program. Obviously the torch was passed, but George O'Leary won games. George O'Leary went 12-1 in the same UCF program in the American. Scott Frost went 13-0. Josh Heupel went 12-1. I'm just saying there's like it's just interesting. I
It's a
think
good
it's interesting.
program. I mean, well,
It
first of
is.
all, location, right? Alumni base is a huge alumni base, right? And you also have 3 BCS slash, whatever you want to call it, these important bowl games in the last, decade or so, 12 years. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a really, really good accomplishment. So it can be done. I think there were like you said, other names, John Summerall, a couple other guys that would have gotten me more excited for sure, without a doubt. I mean, we talked about it in a similar sense, honestly, to Bill Belichick in North Carolina, right? Where you've got, Jeff Monken, Artie Smith, Glenn Schumann, Steve Wilkes, John Summerall, those guys that were in that list, right? It would have been really nice. But here's the thing, though. I mean, it fanned out bad at Nebraska. And now maybe part of it was he was in over his head, right? It was like the alumni, the prodigal son returning. He was going to save that program. Maybe too much pressure was put on him to do that, and maybe he wasn't ready. And he talked about it, like, since the Nebraska firing, obviously it went wrong. He kind of just went off the grid, and it was kind of a nice reset for him. Went back to Scottsdale, Arizona, able to like hang out with his family and his kids, and be in a family bubble. He talked about it and how nice it was having everyone home, and being able to reset. And here he is. He's not taking this job if he's not ready and excited to come back. He didn't need the money. He got a pretty penny payout from Nebraska, and it's not like he's making this crazy buku bucks. Although it's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, and that's nice to have. And obviously the thrill of competing is nice. But to me, I think he's. I don't think it'll fan out like Nebraska, right, and what happened there, but I don't quite see him going 12-0, right, in year 2. I think and obviously there's a big wide gap in between there, but I tend to lean towards that, 50%, if that's it, if that's a spectrum of outcomes where it's like, yeah, he's kind of going to do maybe what Gus Malzahn was going to do for you, and maybe win 6-7 games or so, which to me I think would be a disappointment, because I think the expectations at this program in this conference, the way it's set right now, is better than that, without a doubt. And the way that there are automatic, Arizona freaking State went to the playoffs and competed with Texas. You can't tell me UCF is not in a similar sense there. They can absolutely do that. We talk about the Big 12 all the time being the most competitive, and one of our favorite conferences, because that fact where like you just hit on a roster here and there and you can do some big things.
And a coach.
And a coach.
A coach. Hit on a coach. Like Iowa State hit on a coach. Like feels like Arizona State hit on a coach.
16-31 was what he was at with Nebraska. 23 of those 31 losses were by single digits, including each of his final 13 losses. 22 one-score games, 12 by 5 or fewer. I mean, it is
in the Big Ten West. Which
in the heyday of the Big Ten West. This was not the Wisconsin, and when they were like this. Wisconsin was down, right? Minnesota was one of the best, probably the best program in the Iowa. I guess Iowa. But Minnesota was right up there, and part of that was due to Nebraska being down, and Northwestern being good once in a blue moon, and Illinois being down, and you had opportunity there for sure. And here you are.
Purdue having like a good year every now and then in the Jeff Brom. Actually, I don't even know how much did Jeff Brom even. Oh yeah, Jeff Brom's been there forever, but
yeah, it was.
I guess like some of the peak years, Scott Frost didn't even get Jeff Brom in some of the peak Purdue years. I mean, there's some.
He was fired the year he was fired the year Jeff Brom hit it big, and they went to the Big Ten championship. Yeah, it's super interesting. Now let's Scott Frost here. Let's just talk about where he's been. Right, so he was at Oregon. Right, so he learned under it was Chip Kelly and Mark Helfrich at Oregon. And then he also, like I mentioned, he was with the Rams this past season as like an analyst or so, working with Sean McVay. And so he's an offensive guy. So that he played quarterback, in at Nebraska, excuse me, as well as in the NFL. He's kind of been a GA, OC, quarterbacks coach, kind of like that's been his background there, and it's that's what you're gonna hope for. And I think UCF, not that it's the right fit, and like you can win with a defensive coach there, but I don't know why I just see them as having like a good offense, and part of that due to Scott Frost and Heupel and what he did there, and obviously Malzahn being an offensive guy, but I, that's what you kind of come to expect at that program.
Yeah. In terms of like a coaching staff, right? It's beneficial sometimes to have an offensive minded guy. I don't know. Maybe you can answer this question for me whether or not he's going to be calling plays or not. But feels like in this Big 12, I guess it was more important this past year than like maybe some other years. But having a good defense was a luxury, like in the Big 12, particularly this year with how good teams were able to teams were able to run the ball, and the elite running backs that were in this conference playing good defense and controlling the football was kind of a staple. It's not the Big 12, right? That was 8-9 years ago. It's a different Big 12 right now, right? You've got some good quarterback talent. You have good receivers, like we see. People come out of the Big 12 all the time. In terms of good receivers, like Josh Kelly, emerged as like one of the really good ones that this conference produced last year. Jordan Tyson before he got hurt, but if he gets the defensive staff right, I think it can help him long term a lot.
We'll get into the staff here. The defensive staff is interesting, and I chuckle here because the defense coordinator is also not a reject, but he's a reject.
It is a reject, which is wild, which is why we also wait to do these grades and they talk about these coaches, because it is important to see who they are. Like, what does he want his program to look like? And it looks like defensively, we'll talk about it.
It does not inspire me hope. And now, obviously, like, let's just stop the suspense here. We'll get into it. So, by the way, back to your point, Scott Frost will be the one calling plays. He said, "I want to be the one making the play calls." So, obviously, they'll get a lot of assistance. He's got some guys that have been with him, and are familiar with him, but he's going to be one calling plays. So, just keep that in mind here when we talk about the staff, especially the offensive coordinator. Speaking of, that's going to be Steve Cooper. He was with Frost at Nebraska. Was with Boise State this past season, was the offensive coordinator at Maine the year before that. So obviously, what he did, familiarity with Nebraska, and then having the success with Boise State and what they did. Talk about running the football with Ascent this year was phenomenal. And honestly, throwing the ball when they needed to at times. Wide receiver coach will be Sean Beckton Sr. He was at UCF with Frost. I also believe he played there as a wide receiver, so he's coming back as an alum. The O-line coach, familiar name here, Sean Clark. He was the head football coach, at App State the past 5 seasons. His background is offensive line, so he's getting back into that. Was the O-line coach at App State before that, and then also coached at Kent State and Purdue and Eastern Kentucky. To me, I love having a guy like Sean Clark. Say about him as a head coach. I thought he did well at times this season. Obviously disappointed in the season before, but what he did being a head coach and having the familiarity with all the new changes, and that Scott Frost has been out of the game for a couple years now. I love that, having that hand and that mind to be able to pick about what things to do and responsibilities that head coach has now in 2024 that you didn't have a couple years ago, and especially didn't have at UCF back in 2016. Quarterbacks coach, familiar name for our UCF fans, is Mackenzie Milton. Yep, that Mackenzie Milton, the one that was a superstar quarterback before having the devastating, super sad injury that he did have in 2017. But he was an offensive analyst at Tennessee, with Josh Heupel. So Mackenzie Milton was with a Frost guy, and then he also obviously Heupel coached him as well. So there's that connection there. He'll be the quarterback's coach. The running back coach is Jimmy Beal. So yeah, the offensive staff is interesting. I mean, No one's gonna blow you away. It wasn't some crazy Colin Klein or a big hire that you're pulling away from some other Power Five school, but I think it's interesting. I like some continuity there. We kind of talk about this. I think the one thing that I'm concerned about, which I've talked about, and it's literally come up in every single video we've done so far with these coaching staffs, continuity between the O-line coach and the offensive coordinator, or the offensive play caller in this case is Scott Frost. And I couldn't really find a ton of crossover there, so I don't know what the connection is, but I hope there is one because I think that chemistry is so important. Not saying it's the end all be all, doesn't make it a sure thing, even if it is true. There's a lot of connections and coaches that are good friends and have a lot of chemistry at the O line and OC that does not work out. But here we are with Sean Clark and Scott Frost, and we'll see what happens there on the offensive side, which is his bread and butter. So this has to, like, the offensive has to work, right? If it doesn't work, we're in real trouble with what can happen at UCF.
Yeah, I like Sean Clark. I think he's accomplished. I think he's experienced, right? And if you can't bring continuity in there, right, at the offensive coordinator and offensive line position coach, right, then I think experience matters, you know. But on the defensive side of the football, it gets. I just I don't understand it. I don't understand it how Alex Grinch has a job as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, so he's that's the Alex Grinch, the one that was poster child for a long time with Lincoln Riley at USC and at Oklahoma. He was with, I think, Wisconsin this past season, if I'm not mistaken. Regardless, though, the one silver lining I have, right, is one, right. I think it's funny how there's a little bit of connection between Alex Grinch and Scott Frost about how they did fizz out and how horribly it went and how quickly fans just turned on him and how he was a scapegoat for USC and Oklahoma. He did have big time success at Washington State. And so he is familiar being the defensive coordinator, with an offensive head coach and with, an electric offense. So I do think that's the one silver lining that you do have. That's like, you know what? I mean, at least he knows what he's getting into, right? And also, too, like, I'm not gonna say it, but it can't get much worse, than at USC and Oklahoma. And here's the thing, too, like, it doesn't have to be. It's just sound bad, but like Oklahoma and USC, like, you have big time expectations. Those are top 10 programs, I think, nationally, right? Top 12 program, whatever you want to call them. Like, this is UCF, and not to like slight that program at all, because that's what I'm saying. I think this expectation should be high here for sure. But it's not like he's going to be scrutinized to the level that he was, with Lincoln Riley and at USC and Oklahoma, just because of all the stuff that comes with those jobs. The edge coach is going to be Mike Dawson. Great last name, by the way. He was with him at Nebraska and at UCF. So there's that connection there. When I say him, I mean Scott Frost. The defensive tackles coach is Kenny Martin. He's a stayover from the previous staff. He's an Orlando native, which we love that.
He's good.
Really good. This has been a really good group for a while. They've recruited well. You're talking about Lee Hunter, John Walker, a couple guys like that. Some big time, recruiting battles and wins in that he's been able to develop. It's big time. Linebackers coach is Mark Donofrio. He's was at Stanford with the inside linebackers. He's been a DC before for about 12 years. They usually have, pretty good success stopping the run, which is something Alex Grinch teams did not do well. And he also has that connection. He learned under Al Golden, which we know how we feel about Al Golden on this show. So I like that connection there. DB coach is, going to be a familiar name here, with UCF. Brandon Harris, his brother was an assistant coach, Tim Harris Jr., who was, the UCF's OC and wide receivers coach this past season. But Brendan Harris, he was FAU, Florida Atlantic's cornerback coach, and the co-defense coordinator, whatever you want to call it, back this past season. He's a South Florida native. He played high school at Booker T. Washington. Really good school there. He played at Miami University, obviously in Florida. Was a second-round pick out of the NFL. So we'll see. Obviously, I love that he's got those ties to Florida. Couldn't find a ton of crossover between him and Grinch and Scott Frost, but obviously with a connection to his brother Tim Harris within the program, and obviously his familiarity in the state of Florida, that will help him, in his efforts recruiting and coaching, at the UCF.
I think a big problem with Alex Grinch, like in why it went wrong, was one, we'll call it talent evaluation, right? But generally, you brought talent into the building. Generally, it was also just it was just a combination of missing on your talent evals and then also not developing the talent that you had, effectively, particularly tackling, right? Which if you're gonna be in the Big 12, right, you got to tackle well, right? I mean, it was more important this past year. I'll say it's going to be probably less important in 2025. Let's not clip that in case that happens to be the case. But looking around the league, right, like teams that tackled well in the Big 12, Arizona State doesn't have elite talent on that defense. They do not. But guess what Brian Ward has those guys do? They tackle well. That's what they do. All right. And they were very successful in shutting down some really good running backs in the Big 12 conference and finding ways to control the game. Can we trust Alex Grinch to do that? I don't think that we can. That doesn't mean he won't, but I don't think we can trust him to do that.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And obviously Grinch has familiarity with the Big 12, but here's the problem though. This is a much different Big 12 than it looked just a couple years ago when he was at Oklahoma, right? This was it 8 new teams that are coming in. Like it's been a total drastic overchange. And honestly, the culture of the Big 12, right, in the 2010s was one of like we're gonna throw the ball a bunch, and the early late to that, like you had all these the defensive jokes and all that kind of stuff, the turnstiles that was the Big 12 defenses and how bad tackling was. And here we are, I believe last year you talked about how run game and defense was so important, and it's nice to see how things are cyclical in college football. Otherwise, the other coaching staff to round it out, special teams coordinators Pete Alomar. He has connection with Stanford with Mark Donofrio, is also at Rice. He was their interim head coach at the end of the season, right when their coach got fired. Strength and conditioning is Zach Duval. He was with Duval at UCF as well as with Frost at Nebraska. So there's obviously a lot of connection there. Hopefully that works out. We do talk about these, and we don't talk about special teams coordinators or not special teams coordinators. We don't talk about strength and conditioning coaches a ton, in terms of like evaluating them because, like, I'll be honest, like that's not really my forte here. Like it's hard to do that, but those are like very, very important, right, positions in your program, like how important that is. You talk about being good at tackling, and part of that is being in good shape and being physical and having mentality. And your strength and conditioning coaches, those are like big culture setters, especially in the offseason as we speak right now, in winter and in late and early spring. So obviously I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's a home run hire with Duval, but it's nice to see there's experience there and continuity, and it is a very, very important job.
In terms of grades, all right, let's give them. Okay. When we talk about our grades, right, we go by a very easy scale. All right. An A means you're going to exceed expectations. A B means you're going to meet expectations. A C means you're not going to meet expectations. And it's hard because, again, we have to grade these relative to expectations, right? You can't just you know, say Kirby Smart, hiring Kirby Smart is an A, right? And then everyone else is not. You know what I'm saying? Just because someone's not going to win national championships, that doesn't make them a bad coach, right? So if B's meeting expectations, I have him slightly not meeting expectations because I think expectations are very high. I teetered with giving this a C plus. I'm going to settle with a B minus, and I think that's pretty nice. Not going to lie. And I think people are going to disagree with us, CD, when we are not as confident in Scott Frost as maybe some UCF fans, as maybe some college football fans. I just think that this is very, very interesting. It felt like the quote unquote safe hire from the athletic director's perspective, which you and I both agree it's not actually safe. It feels like they're just kind of holding on to those 2 seasons, or that 1 season, right, that he had with them. And when you bring in a defensive staff coach that includes Alex Grinch as your defensive coordinator, which, by the way, there are so many good defensive coordinators out there. So many that are just available. And it's like, that's what you got, And like you took a year hiatus, and then you went to go be a passing or game coordinator and senior offensive analyst at the Rams, and then like you come back and you're like, yeah, I want this guy, right? and he lived in L.A. Like, you know how people in LA feel about Alex Grinch, you know? Unless there's
Well,
something that we're missing,
well,
right?
I mean, Grinch had a job for a long time, right? And like he
They
did
won a
so
lot of
like
games despite him.
I know. I'm just saying like that's why I find it funny, and you know how sports love to be ironic, right? Where you have two guys that are similar, right? Scott Frost and Alex Grinch. I'm with you here on a B minus, and I'm also with you that expectations are high, and I'm also with you, you know, that I thought they were better coaches. We talked about that in this cycle, and what a gift it was to be in this cycle. Honestly, you know, if you're UCF and you having the pick of the litter, and yeah, I was thinking about a C, but I think right, like it worked once. I'm not saying it's going to work again, but it's not like he's all bad, right? And similar as Alex Grinch, like he's had success before. And this program, you can win that. You can recruit well out. Now we'll see how it does. Obviously, I'm not going to judge him on this 2025 class because he didn't really get a chance to do it. But you had, you know, was it 78th high school recruiting ranking? That's not great. I know there was only about 14 kids, so that's kind of reflected in that. You did go out and add 27 transfers already. You know, we'll see how those turn up. You know, obviously it's not that excuse me, it's not that, you know, Scott Frost forgot how to coach at Nebraska. It's just there were simple things that did go wrong for sure, and he's got to iron those out if he's going to have success at UCF. But yeah, I'm at B minus here, and honestly, like UCF's a program that I'm rooting for. I think college football is better when they're good. And honestly, I think they are a program, a sneaky big program in college football, being in the state of Florida. And they're also one of those schools in the Big 12 that I think can make a jump and have serious, serious talent, right? And Scott Frost, is he the guy to do that? I mean, talent's never been his problem at bringing in. It's really maximizing what he did at Nebraska. So we'll see. Obviously, it's an interesting one. It'll be one we'll be following and monitoring closely as we get close to the season. We'll preview them, you know, in July and August when we get there. But I don't know. You tell us how you guys feel in this in the comments, because this is one that I had a tough time doing because you did have the success and what he did, inheriting what like an 0-12 team and making him go 12 and 0, 13 and 0 this the season after. And yeah, it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be really interesting how it plays out.
Yeah, and I think like national media even is a little bit polarized in this hire because there's just a lot of unknown. Like I'm seeing grades that people are giving out that are like B pluses, and these are obviously at a different scale that you know we put. Some people are putting this as like a top five hire in the cycle, right? Some people are putting this as a B plus grade, and then I've also seen C minus grades, right, as well. You know, like maybe not as generous. I would put us on the less generous side. Uh, Maybe a little bit more hesitant to just believe that this is plug and play. But it is really interesting to see that, and I would love to hear UCF fans, like you said, talk about this because my only thought is that like I feel like fans may like this hire because they know what he's capable of at that program, but it's a different ball game. It's a different ball game. So I'd ask UCF fans to be, cautiously optimistic, but I'm not very optimistic. So
The thing that worries me is there were, you know, 4 or 5 guys maybe in, and obviously like it's all relative, right? So like being a top 5 hire doesn't mean he's like, you know, top, or means doesn't, excuse me, like I don't think it's a top 5 hire at all in this cycle. I think it's one of my lower grades I've given. It's just interesting because there are guys in the Power Four, or excuse me, the G5 that I would have rather and I would have gotten more excited about at UCF that were hired this cycle, right? And obviously, like context matters. Not everyone's a great fit in every program, but I also think that there's kind of some lie to that. I think if you're a good coach, you can work anywhere. I look at Bronco Mendenhall, Utah State. I look at Southern Miss, Charles Huff. I look at Central Michigan. You know, guy even like Matt Drinkhall. I look at Temple and what Casey Keeler had success at. I look at Charlotte, and I look at Tim Alvin, FAU. Even Zach Kitley's a very exciting one. If you want to go an exciting hire in the state of Florida, like Kitley's a guy. And obviously, you know what, Barry Odom, and we'll get to those grades later. You know, at Purdue, but yeah, it's bizarre. It's going to be one that we're going to be monitoring for sure.
That's going to do it for our coaching carousel episode today. That's another 3 coaches, 3 of them up, 3 of them down. All right, we've got about 2 more episodes of these, and then we'll start getting into more stuff. NFL drafts right around the corner. Combines, actually, the combine will have already happened by the time that most of you guys view this. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff in these next coming months. Just wait. Spring football is upon us. I mean, we love covering this kind of stuff, and we're glad that we can give you guys this kind of product too, because I don't think a lot of people produce a content or a product like this in terms of the in-depth hiring of specific coaches from a national college football perspective. So we're happy that you guys could be a part of the journey. If you guys could like and subscribe, that'd be awesome, because we'd love for you to stick with us as we continue this journey. So we appreciate you guys.
Yeah, like Matthew said, appreciate you guys. I had a lot of fun doing this. We got into some Power Five. We talked about some Chief Five as well, and Tulsa, and we got a couple more episodes. That's about it. Yeah, of these coaching carousel guys, and so hopefully you're enjoying that content with us.
And we'll see y'all in the next one.